My name is Alan Maleche. I'm the Executive Director at Kelin. Kelin stands for the Kenya Legal and Ethical Issues Network on HIV and AIDS, but we are generally called as Kelin. So the reason why we ventured into the research on dowry is based on the 11 years of work we have been doing with the widows, with the elders, and with the in-laws, and through the work, be it facilitating for mediation to happen, facilitating for trainings to happen, facilitating for resettlement of a widow, the issue of dowry constantly came up. And our stakeholders then requested us to look into the forms, nature, and extent of dowry, but look at it from a lens of what impact does dowry have on women's rights generally, on their right to inherit, and generally on rights related to land and property.
The research was conducted among the Luo community and specifically in Kisumu and Homa Bay counties, because these are the counties that Kelin has been working with for a very long time. So the first step was engaging in key informant interviews with experts and the communities that we work with. These range from elders, who are usually the custodians of culture. We talked to chiefs, because usually at the community levels, they are the gatekeepers of the community, among other stakeholders. So we did the key informant interviews with the stakeholders for us to be able to understand a more expert analysis of it. And after that, we decided to do what we call a focus group discussion, where we are bringing people together and having open discussions on what dowry is, what it entails, what is the distinction between dowry and bride price, how does it affect women's property right, is it a good practice, is it a bad practice, and if so, then what are the recommendations?
The findings of the research have established that indeed dowry plays a central role, especially in the lives of women, especially those who are married within the Luo culture, because without dowry, a marriage does not exist according to Luo culture. When a culture or a community does not recognize your marriage, yet you're married legally under the law, and because dowry has not been paid, they don't recognize it, that has untelling consequences. When dowry is not paid, a woman suffers many violations, including the inability to bury her husband, the inability to have access to ancestral land, the inability to have access to some property that has even been jointly bought between her and the husband. And so dowry payment or non-payment of it has got dire consequences for the rights of women.
The giving of dowry, when a man marries and his family is expected to give the lady's family a form of dowry, I don't see that dying. Of course, it's been associated with some negative cultural practices, but you realize, during the research, what we realized is that some of this negativity that we are seeing is because of an erosion of us disrespecting the culture.
Traditionally, land rights existed, in fact, in my opinion, in a far better form than has been legislated. Women were not just allocated land, they were given. These wives in a polygamous setup had land. It was theirs, it was known. This is so-and-so's land. It was known. For them to till and for them to genuinely and literally do what they saw fit. It was theirs. No one interfered with it.
Our culture, in its correct meaning and form, protects the widows, the women's right. But it is being adulterated, it is being manipulated, it is being abused. And the abuse now is seen as the norm.
When a man passes on, some people have misbehaved with widows, by denying them their rights. But in a true Luo tradition, a widow inherits all the properties and land which belong to the husband.
When you have a situation where the population growth rate in any community outstrips the understanding of land use and the usage to which land can be put, and they stick to the traditional way of managing land, suddenly people feel that this land isn't enough. And the people to suffer are the women. And more so if the they are widows, because they now don't have someone who will be able to stand up for them and speak for these rights.
Generally, in the research, we do outline the kind of violations that women face because of lack of documentation. And for us, it has been very important for us to be able to advocate so that any kind of marriage that one gets into, you have to make sure that it is registered. So the practice has been the customary marriages that are conducted in the communities, nobody follows up to get the necessary documentation. And that's why we have the back and forth in terms of the community coming back and saying you were never married in the first place and therefore you are not considered to be a wife.
Even where a year has been paid or even a token of the dowry has been paid, please register that ceremony, that document, and say on this particular day, these people came to my parents, they brought even a small cow or whatever it is, or an envelope with this 20,000 shillings. We were given consent to marriage, people sign, and it is registered at the registrar of birth, of whatever. Now at that point, that lady will have a certificate. Now if she has a certificate at some future time, when people are trying to throw her off the property and say, where are you, you didn't finish paying your dowry bits and pieces, this is what will save her. In the very same way that even in people married under the civil, the Christian and all of that, what saves them in the long run when things are whatever, it is their certificate.
The first thing for us will be documentation all the time. If you're supposed to do a customary marriage and you decide this is the kind of marriage that you want to do, make sure that you get that marriage registered with the marriage registrar, because otherwise you cannot be able to prove that and bring that in evidence that you're married to somebody.
I think we need to call a spade, and the reality is even the middle class, upper class Kenyan woman, if you don't have your property registered in your name, my dear, your rights will be violated. No one will remember you purchased that land. No one will remember you had a stake in that land. And so the same way we are educating the villagers is the same way we need to educate the middle class woman and say, even as you're buying property with your husband, could you ensure that your name, both your names are there?
The issue of dowry is a very sensitive topic, and we must approach it with caution, noting that this has been a lifelong practice among certain communities, not only the Luo in Kenya, but in many other regions. And as we approach it, we must also look at it as against the developments that have happened in the human rights world and see where do we strike the balance to ensure that women's rights are not violated and that the culture also is, to some extent, allowed to continue, but in a way that it doesn't affect the rights of women. So a lot of effort and work is needed to collect the right evidence, to have the right conversations with the stakeholders, and to forge a joint way forward around how we can safeguard the rights of women.